Everyone has heard of the phrase late bloomer at some point in their lives. It mainly describes how certain flowers and plants bloom later in the year than most plants. It is also used to describe people who may be seeing success or satisfaction later than usual. For me, my fifth year of college was the year where I finally found a nice niche with the music department, and I was becoming more and more involved with other activities around the university. I don't know if it's just because I'm a super senior, which is a term used for people who are still in college beyond their fourth year, and I just simply got used to routines of college, or that now I was looked up to by a lot of younger people. Or maybe it's because it finally hit me that I was graduating college soon, and I was motivated now more than ever to embrace what Kane University had to offer. What I didn't tell you about the Nazareth Farm trip in the last video was that it took place during spring break. Kane has their own way of doing volunteer service trips during break. It's simply called alternative spring break. Instead of having a break where we stay home, watch TV, rot your brain on video games, alternative spring break is a way to provide service to your community doing various projects in the outdoors. It's a relatively new program, and it was created after the events of Hurricane Sandy in 2012. And basically, alternative spring break for alternative spring break this year, the CLS, which stands for the Center for Leadership and Service, they partnered up with a non-profit organization that provides relief and recovery effort. And it's sad to think that in this state, there are many people who are still suffering from the effects of Sandy, almost 5 years later. The organization that we teamed up with is called A Future with Hope, created by the United Methodist Church of Greater New Jersey, and we would be going to work sites around Atlantic City. So what's different about this trip versus Nazareth Farm was that we didn't know what work site we would go to until maybe a few hours before the scheduled trip. We had to rely on the project coordinator from A Future with Hope to tell us what we were going to do. Also, instead of a farm, we had a hotel filled with all the amenities, including a jacuzzi. This trip was also shorter than Naz Farm, going only for 4 days. We departed Kane from Sunday, March 5th, and we returned on Thursday, March 9th. On our first night, we got to know everyone by doing an icebreaker activity and having dinner at the hotel dining room. That same night, we also broke off into teams of 2. Each team had to create their own team name and draw a flag. This activity encouraged us to be creative. For a while, we were struggling to find a name for our team, and out of the blue, I suggested All Hands on Deck. I think what happened was I assumed that maybe our project was going to involve making a deck like I did in Nazareth Farm, but then it's also an expression meaning teamwork. Everyone in our group loved the name immediately. That's when the floodgates opened up for ideas as to how our flag would look like. And I'll touch upon this toward the end of the blog. And just quickly, the reason why we split up into teams is because we were going to do separate work. We could be working in the same location but on 2 different houses. That ends up happening sometimes. But anyway, our first day, the next day, took us just the outskirts of Atlantic City, where we had to dig up soil and evenly distribute it around the foundations of a new house. Now, this is where the teams come in now, because there were actually 2 houses that had soil, a pile of soil that needed to be distributed. The houses were no less than 2/10 of a mile apart, but we were assigned to different houses, and that's where the teams came into play. So the purpose of putting that soil, layering that soil down, was so that when there's huge amounts of rain, the rain doesn't settle and collect like in a bowl. The earth would be leveled so that flooding wouldn't happen. And the first day was a tough day. It was on the windy side, and we worked for probably about 8 hours. After we had lunch, we went to the beach and took pictures and even dared someone to do a polar plunge into the Atlantic. And just in the distance, you could see the now abandoned Revel Hotel and Casino. Mentally, we were drained, but we all had each other's back, and we got the job done by just about 5:30 p.m. Day 2 served as a half day, meaning that day 2 was a day which we would further bond with our own team members and go outside to do an extracurricular activity. The morning was a little bit rocky. Our assignment was to move heavy pieces of sheetrock to the second floor of a house that was located in Little Egg Harbor Township. And we had to deliver it on 2 flights of stairs because the house was built on stilts. So the first floor is technically the second. But when we arrived, there was no sheetrock, so we were left with nothing to do, and pretty much we were on standby. After about 1 hour, we were reassigned to another house in Atlantic City, this time in a much older and run-down neighborhood near the boardwalk area. And our job was simple: clean up. To be more specific, we were to clean up scraps of wood and any other unnecessary junk in the yard to a dumpster that was placed nearby. Some of it was quite disgusting and dangerous too. Some of the wood contained rusted nails, which could be dangerous if you never got a tetanus shot. One piece of wood plank looked like it was lying there since 2012. It was worn out, soggy, and beneath it had white webs and large spiders. They weren't dangerous though. So after that, fun in the evening. When we got back to the hotel, we prepped for a night of fun. And we were provided with 2 options: a movie or bowling. Well, actually, it wasn't, both of the options were open, like one group of people were going to go watch a movie and another group was going to go bowling. Since I didn't like the movie theater, I decided to go bowling. In fact, over half the group went to watch the movie with one of the CLS staff members. They went to watch the thriller Get Out. Meanwhile, a smaller group went to a bowling alley named Donato's, which was located about 5 miles down the road from our hotel. And it was actually a nice, clean bowling alley with a fancy restaurant, a bar, and even mini golf. Prior to that day, I haven't bowled in at least 12 years, so, I expected to be a bit rusty. Unfortunately, I didn't get a strike, and I was very close to getting spares on numerous occasions, but sadly, I fell short. In the end, I almost came in last place, and thus proving that bowling is not something I would pursue as a career. After bowling, we still had time to spare, and we decided to do mini golf. But this wasn't just your ordinary mini golf course. No. This was called Galactic Mini Golf, and it took place in a dark room with black light shining. Special chalk was used to make the wood and imagery glow in the dark. I can't say much other than I underperformed like in bowling. So the next 2 clips you're going to see are very short, and both of them feature me bowling and mini golfing respectively.
Woo! Good job!
Alright, everyone. Oh. One. Two.
Three.
So after that, we got dinner at a pizzeria, which was absolutely delicious because it was brick oven baked. Traditional indeed. On top of that, it was a nice warm night. Day 3 was our final work day, and this had to be our hardest day of the 3 days that we were working. We were sent back to the house that needed sheetrock to be moved. That sheetrock was heavy indeed. There needed to be a team of 4 to carry that up to the second floor of the house. On top of that, it was so windy, so when we were holding that sheetrock vertically, the wind was blowing against it, and it's like, one of us feared that we were going to sail off into into the sky because the wind was simply that strong. We had a storm pass over the night before, and it left a very windy morning ahead of us. But we got it done. It was tough. Like I definitely got a workout out of that. So then afterwards, we were sent over to a town called Tom's River, which was the farthest north that we've drove away from the hotel for a work day. And for this project, we had to install insulation to the underside of the house. Once again, the house was elevated on stilts. Working with insulation can be annoying at times because it is made out of fiberglass. It looks fluffy like cotton candy and you want to eat it, but if fiberglass gets on your skin, it can itch really badly. So, it was encouraged that goggles be used. Now, there was a little snafu during the installation. There are 2 ways that insulation is installed. One way is to put the fluffy side faced up, meaning that you would see the brown paper covering the bottom. That's usually how you install insulation for the attic. However, when the coordinator for the project from Future of Hope came by to see how we were doing, he told us that it should be reversed and that the fluffy side should be put downward, not upward. And we were like, oh my gosh. Fortunately, we weren't too far into the installation, so backtracking and fixing everything wasn't a problem. In fact, in this instance, when the chips were down, we weren't submissive, and we kept on pushing so that we can continue to complete it. And we did, with just ample of time of daylight to spare. Being that we were in Tom's River, we actually went on a detour to Kane's Ocean County campus, significantly smaller than the main campus, but it's well maintained. I've never been to Kane Ocean prior to this trip, so it was nice to go inside one of the main buildings. And also, I ate some pretty hot and cheesy pizza for lunch that day, so coming to the campus could not have come at a more perfect time because I needed to use the bathroom. So the next morning before we left, we did our flag presentation. Earlier in the video, I said that our team name is All Hands on Deck. So in the end, our flag featured one handprint from each of us, and we personalized it with different colors. There, we also put words or small phrases that we thought was the themes for days 1, 2, and 3. The other team's name was called the Divine Nine, since there were 9 of them on that team. They also had a unique flag that had the word Divine written on top and the bottom. And in the middle was a giant 9 with all the team members' names contained in it. After the presentation, the CLS leader said in a reflection of how this has been such a wonderful experience. Throughout the days that we were down there, we were asked to write a journal answering a question relating to service. They were different each day, and I'm going to pick one and share with you my answer to conclude the video. So, in an email that I actually still saved, here's what it says. So we were posed the question, what value could there possibly be in moving a pile of debris from an old backyard? Why waste your time on a meaningless task? Would you feel better about yourself if you had leveled 4 piles of dirt, each or demolished a 3-story building? What does that say about the giver of service to need to be validated for the amount of work completed? Are you a better person if you volunteered on 1 hour versus 2 hours of your time, or if you moved an entire pile versus just one brick? Is service truly selfless? How do you compromise your desire to feel good about giving after volunteering and simply giving back because you think it's your responsibility? Do you agree with the quote below? And the quote is, "Service is the rent we pay for being. It is the very purpose of life and not something you do in your spare time." And so I answered, there are so many parallels to certain things in our lives that relate to removing a pile of debris from an old backyard. In fact, I think removing a pile of debris has significant value in its own way, just as installing drywall. I know removing a pile of debris seems tedious, taxing, and a waste of time, but it's worth the trouble to get rid of them when they have very little value relative to the current time. It's like cleaning up our room. You have to get rid of unnecessary junk in order to make your room clean and fresh. In a work site, whatever is unnecessary needs to be thrown out. It's not a matter of what happens now. In the end, it's about the final product. That's what it's all about when it comes to service projects, in my humble opinion. You can't let ego get the best of you. It's not about showing off and being full of yourself and how much you do. It's about what the end goal is for the overall project. Yes, leveling 4 piles of dirt may feel like it will take a while, but we're one step closer to finishing the project. Yes, demolishing a building feels faster, but it's also one step closer to achieving the same kind of goal. The worst that can happen is if those 4 piles of dirt or that abandoned building remains the same and nothing gets done about it. If one has the mindset going into volunteering, then thinking about being the better person for volunteering 1 hour versus 2 hours or moving 1 brick versus 4 piles of dirt should not be a factor. When doing service, you never do it with recognition in mind. That gives the wrong impression that doing service is a competition for bragging rights. When we're doing a volunteer service project, we don't see it as a job. It's not an obligation. Everyone technically doesn't have a responsibility to volunteer. It's optional. However, I think every human being has to be of service, one way to or another, in the everyday world. We have to be of service to our families, our friends, and our colleagues in the most simplest form. Us humans should not be able to put aside service too much and be totally ignorant to the times. We have to pull our own weight to take care of the earth so that we can inhabit it for generations to come. And so that's why I strongly agree with the quote. Service is the rent we pay for being. It is the very purpose of life, and not something you do in your spare time. Thank you.